For 9 years, the same stray dog sat in front of the same house. Rain, snow, blazing heat, it didn't matter. He was always there, same spot, same eyes, same quiet hope. Neighbors whispered stories. Some said he was abandoned. Others believed he belonged to someone inside that house, but no one ever saw the door open for him. He never barked, never chased cars, he just waited. And that silence, that was what made people stop. Because a dog that doesn't beg, doesn't move, that's a dog who's holding on to something. People began calling him Shadow, because he was always there, a shadow of a past no one could see. And while the world changed around him, new families moved in, kids grew up, seasons passed, Shadow stayed. Some tried to feed him, he accepted it, politely, but never wagged his tail. Not once in 9 years. It was like he wasn't really living, just waiting. Then, on a Tuesday morning, something changed. The porch light, which had been off for years, flickered on. The door creaked open, just a little, and from the darkness inside, a woman stepped out. She didn't look at Shadow right away. She just stared at the sky like she hadn't seen it in a long time. Then her eyes fell on him, and when they did, Shadow stood up. For the first time in years, he stood and wagged his tail. That's when the neighbors knew. This wasn't just any dog, and that woman, she was the reason he waited. Shadow had waited 9 years, every morning, every night. But now, everything changed in a moment. That Tuesday morning, the woman who opened the door wasn't a stranger. She carried an old scarf faded and frayed around her neck. There was a photo tucked inside her pocket. A dog. It looked exactly like Shadow. Her eyes glistened as she scanned the empty porch. Then she saw him. She reached forward, carefully. Shadow didn't flinch. That first touch echoed a lifetime of longing. Their skin connected across time. I stood hidden behind a tree, heart pounding. Sunlight cut through branches and hit their faces at the same time. In that brief slice of light I knew, something deep had awakened. Neighbors noticed her too. They saw tears in her eyes, not sadness exactly, but something deeper, recognition, relief, guilt. As she led Shadow inside, I finally asked her name. She paused, breathing in the silence of the porch. Ruth, she said. And there it was, a name that carried weight. A home that carried memory. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and dusty sunshine. Shadow sniffed every corner, exploring like someone retracing steps. He settled on one spot, mid-floor, and lay down. Ruth knelt beside him, placing the photo near his head. She whispered words I couldn't hear, but Shadow listened. That afternoon, Ruth walked me through the house. All those rooms felt haunted now. She explained that Shadow had been her first dog rescued from a shelter 9 years ago. They lost touch when she moved across the ocean, overwhelmed by life. Somehow Shadow found his way back. She had driven home 2 days earlier, back to the old neighborhood, hoping he was still around. She found him in the rain, in the exact spots where she left. 9 years she had planned to return. 9 years he had waited. By the time Ruth finished speaking, the sun had dipped. Shadow lay at her feet, breathing easy. I felt a quiet shift in the air. A chapter that had died years ago was coming back to life. I realized then, stories like this don't belong to dogs or people. They belong to time and to faith. And every second spent waiting can still mean everything. That night, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. Ruth sat by the fire, her hand resting on Shadow's back. He didn't move much, but his eyes stayed open, watching her like he didn't want to blink and risk losing her again. I stayed quiet, sitting a few feet away. It wasn't my place to speak. Some reunions don't need narrators, just witnesses. She told me about the day he vanished. 9 years ago, she had packed her life into boxes and left town without saying goodbye to anyone. Shadow was supposed to come with her, but during the chaos of moving, he slipped out the front door. She searched 4 hours, then days, then life took over. Ruth broke down in the middle of that sentence. Her shoulders shook, not just from sorrow, but from shame. Because she had given up, and he hadn't. Shadow stayed. He waited through storms, winters, scorching summers. Neighbors fed him, children left him water bowls. But he never left the porch. He believed I was coming back, she said softly. And I didn't deserve that kind of faith. There's a silence that comes after truth like that. It isn't empty. It's full of things no one knows how to say. Ruth stood and walked over to the window, outside. The wind pushed at the trees, but the porch light held steady. She looked back at Shadow, now asleep, his breathing slow and deep. He still chooses his house. After everything, somewhere in that moment, I realized the story wasn't about abandonment. It was about choice. And how some bonds survive the breaking. Ruth looked at me. I don't know how to earn him back. I didn't answer right away. Because maybe you don't earn back that kind of love. Maybe you just stay, like he did. For 9 years, the same stray dog sat in front of the same house. Rain, snow, blazing heat, it didn't matter. He was always there, same spot, same eyes, same quiet hope. Neighbors whispered stories. Some said he was abandoned. Others believed he belonged to someone inside that house, but no one ever saw the door open for him. He never barked, never chased cars, he just waited. And that silence, that was what made people stop. Because a dog that doesn't beg, doesn't move, that's a dog who's holding on to something. People began calling him Shadow, because he was always there, a shadow of a past no one could see. And while the world changed around him, new families moved in, kids grew up, seasons passed, Shadow stayed. Some tried to feed him, he accepted it, politely, but never wagged his tail. Not once in 9 years. It was like he wasn't really living, just waiting. Then, on a Tuesday morning, something changed. The porch light, which had been off 4 years, flickered on. The door creaked open, just a little, and from the darkness inside, a woman stepped out. She didn't look at Shadow right away. She just stared at the sky like she hadn't seen it in a long time. Then her eyes fell on him, and when they did, Shadow stood up. For the first time in years, he stood and wagged his tail. That's when the neighbors knew. This wasn't just any dog, and that woman, she was the reason he waited. The knock came just after noon. 3 sharp hits, not rushed, not hesitant. I was drying dishes when I heard it, and something about the rhythm made my stomach tighten. I wasn't expecting anyone. And Ruth was in the garden with Shadow, her hand brushing gently through his fur as he lay in the sun. When I opened the door, a man stood there, late 40s. Neatly dressed, but with a tiredness in his eyes that didn't match the rest of him. "Afternoon," he said, offering a brief nod. "Name's Victor. I'm looking for Ruth." The way he said it told me this wasn't casual. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "She's out back." He didn't move. Just looked past me, like he could already see her through the walls. "I'm her brother," he said finally. I got her letter. A part of me relaxed, another part tensed. Ruth had told me she wrote to him, but she hadn't expected a reply. She said too many years had passed, too many things left unsaid. I led him through the house. When Ruth saw him, she froze. It was like watching two ghosts recognize each other. The weight of shared silence filled the air. He didn't speak, just walked forward and knelt by Shadow. "So he really came back," Victor said quietly. Ruth nodded. "He did." They sat in silence, watching the dog. Then Victor looked up. "Why now?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She reached for the leash that still lay coiled nearby. "I spent years running from the things I didn't want to feel. Shame, regret, fear. But when he came back, I realized I couldn't keep pretending none of it mattered." Victor's voice was soft. "You mattered. Even when you disappeared, you mattered. Shadow stirred beside them, his tail thumping once on the grass. Victor reached out, touched Ruth's shoulder. Come home, just for a visit. Mom still asks about you. I can't leave him now, Ruth said, her voice trembling. Then bring him. Maybe he's what we all needed to forgive each other. In that moment, something opened. A window long sealed shut. Not everything broken stays broken. Sometimes all it takes is one return, and one brave decision to answer the knock. The next morning, I helped Ruth pack. It wasn't much. Just a duffel with some clothes, a blanket Shadow refused to sleep without, and an old photograph I found tucked behind her dresser mirror. In it, she stood between two boys in front of a faded blue porch. One of them was Victor. The other must have been the brother who never came back. She didn't speak much as we loaded the car, but her eyes kept drifting to Shadow, who waited patiently by the passenger door, as if he'd always known the road would lead back. We left just after sunrise. The sky was painted in gentle streaks of gold and violet. The trees blurred past us like old memories too fast to hold. Ruth stared out the window, her hand resting lightly on Shadow's back. He leaned into her touch, eyes half closed, calm in a way I hadn't seen before. An hour into the drive, she finally spoke. I was 17 when I ran. No warning, no note. Just grabbed a bag and vanished. I didn't press. I let her speak in her own rhythm. They blamed Victor, said he should have stopped me. But he was only a kid himself. He didn't know how far gone I already was. There was a quiet ache in her voice. Not just guilt, something deeper. Grief, maybe. The kind that builds when time robs you of closure. And when I didn't show up for the funeral, I think that's when they gave up. Whose funeral? I asked gently. My twin, Marcus. He died 2 years after I left. Overdose. Silence settled again. Only the low hum of the tires on gravel kept us tethered to the moment. I kept thinking if I came back, I'd be blamed, or worse. That no one would want to see me. Shadow let out a soft huff, as if responding to her confession. But when he came back, when that dog crossed half the county to find me, I realized I couldn't keep living, was already dead. We pulled off the road for a moment, parked by a field of tall grass swaying in the breeze. Ruth stepped out, stretched, and walked a little way into the open. Shadow followed. She turned to me, a faint smile on her lips. I don't know what's waiting for me, but I know I'm not going alone. Sometimes, the journey isn't about the destination. It's about reclaiming the courage to face the roads we once ran from, and knowing we're no longer the same person who fled. The sun was high when we reached the outskirts of the town Ruth once called home. It wasn't much more than a few scattered buildings, a gas station, and a diner with a sign that hadn't been lit in years. But the moment she saw it, her shoulders tensed, her hands gripped her knees. Shadow lifted his head, sensing the change in her heartbeat, the shift in the air. We turned onto a narrow road lined with oak trees. At the end stood a pale yellow house with peeling paint, cracked shutters, and a sagging porch that seemed to sigh under its own weight. Time hadn't been kind to it, but Ruth's breath caught all the same. That's it, she whispered. That's home. We parked by the gate. Shadow jumped out first, tail low but wagging. Ruth followed slowly, her feet heavy as if every step carried the weight of what she had left behind. The porch creaked under our feet. She hesitated before knocking. Her hand hovered over the door for a long second. Then it opened before she touched it. A woman stood there, grey streaked her dark hair. Her face was tired, but alert. The lines around her mouth weren't from age. They were from years of silence, of waiting. Ruth, she said, like it was both a name and a question. Ruth didn't answer at first. Then her voice came, small but steady. Hi, Aunt Lorna. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lorna stepped aside, eyes flicking to the dog at Ruth's heel. I always told Victor you weren't dead, she muttered. Come in, The air inside the house was thick with memories. Photographs lined the walls, a clock ticked loudly, and somewhere down the hall, a radio played a hymn so softly it almost wasn't there. Ruth walked like she was stepping through a dream. Her fingers brushed along the table, the frame, the chair by the fireplace. Shadow followed her closely, never more than a step behind. Lorna brought out iced tea, poured it without asking. They think I'm crazy, you know, still talking about you. Still believing you'd come back, Ruth's voice cracked. I thought I'd lost the right to come back, you did, but you came anyway. And that matters more. There are houses that fall apart when people leave. And there are houses that wait, not for forgiveness, but for the chance to start over. This house had held grief, silence, regret. But in that moment, it held something else, hope. That night, the house didn't sleep. The floorboards whispered with every step. The wind tapped gently at the window panes, like fingers testing the boundaries of what was safe and known. Ruth sat in the old armchair by the fireplace, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a knitted blanket that still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Shadow was curled at her feet, but his ears stayed up, twitching at every creak and sigh of the house. He wasn't resting. He was guarding. I stayed in the hallway, watching them. There was something sacred in the way Ruth sat, like someone revisiting the altar of a life half-lived. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on photos, furniture, corners, but it wasn't the room she was seeing. It was everything that had happened here. She broke the silence. I used to hide behind that sofa when he came home drunk. If I didn't make a sound, he wouldn't find me. I stepped closer, slowly, unsure if I should speak. And if he did, I asked. She looked at me. Her expression didn't change, but her voice dropped. Then I stopped being a person for a while. Shadow stood up then, walked to her, pressed his body against her legs and looked up. No barking, no whining, just presence. That kind of comfort animals give without asking anything in return. Ruth reached down and placed her hand on his head. He never liked dogs. Said they were loud and filthy. But Shadow, he makes it quieter in here. Even the memories. A sound came from the back room. A drawer opening, a door shifting in the wind. She didn't flinch. They tried to make me forget. Said I was lucky to have survived. That remembering just fed the pain. But forgetting doesn't heal, it buries. And one day, it all starts knocking again. She stood up, walked to a cabinet, opened it. Inside were journals, dozens, stacked neatly, each labeled with a year. I started writing when I left, just to make sure I still existed somewhere. She handed me one. The first .2013. I opened it. The first page had only one line. I don't know who I am, but I know who I'm not. I looked at her. You want to read them all again? She shook her head. I want to burn them. And then I want to write something new. That night, we built a small fire in the backyard. One by one, Ruth dropped the journals into the flames. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. And when the last one turned to ash, she looked up at the stars. They never told me healing would feel like grieving, but it does. And that's okay. Shadow howled softly. Ruth smiled. The night Ruth collapsed, the weather turned, thunder rolled in like a warning. She lay in bed, pale and trembling, the letter still clutched in her hand, outside. The stray dog hadn't moved. He was soaked, his fur plastered to his bones, but his eyes never left the front door. The nurse called the doctor. Her voice was tight, urgent. She's not responding well, the stress. It's too much. Inside Ruth's mind, everything blurred, faces, regrets, the weight of a life she had locked away. And in the middle of it all those eyes, the dog's eyes, always waiting. Lightning flashed, the power cut out. For a moment, the house fell into deep, suffocating silence. And then a sound, not thunder, not wind. A whine, soft, persistent, familiar, The nurse opened the door just a crack to check the generator. And in that second, the dog pushed through. Dripping wet, mud-covered, but calm, determined. He walked straight past her, into the house, nose low, as if he knew exactly where to go. Ruth's room. He stopped at the door. The nurse tried to block him, but Ruth's voice weak, raspy cut through the chaos. Let him in. She was awake, barely, but those words came from somewhere deeper than consciousness. Somewhere ancient. The dog stepped in. He approached the bed slowly, like someone afraid of breaking a spell, and then, without hesitation, he rested his head gently on her hand. Tears rolled down Ruth's cheeks. You came back, she whispered. The nurse didn't understand, but she didn't need to. In that moment, the storm outside faded. Inside, something older than memory healed. Spring arrived before we noticed, not because of the calendar, but because the cold lost its bite and the wind began to smell like earth and green things. Ruth was different. Her posture changed. She moved through the cabin like she belonged to herself again. She painted the living room, threw away old curtains, bought flowers. Not fake ones to imitate life, but real ones to invite it in. Shadow had stopped guarding the door. He slept stretched out in the sun, legs twitching with dreams. He still followed Ruth everywhere, but it wasn't protection anymore. It was companionship. One morning, she handed me a hammer and pointed to the old shed behind the cabin. We're going to rebuild it, properly. This time, I laughed. But she was serious. It used to be his, every board, every nail. I want it to be mine now. We worked for weeks, tearing down what was rotten, salvaging what was solid. She learned to measure and cut, to sand and stain. Her hands became rough, her arms strong. And with every board she laid down, I saw the old house inside her begin to collapse too. We didn't talk much while building. But the silence wasn't heavy, it was warm, full of meaning without needing to be spoken. When it was done, she stood at the doorway and looked around. It's not perfect, she said. No, but it's yours, she nodded. And then she did something I didn't expect. She took a small metal plaque out of her pocket. It had been in the old cabin, nailed above the bedroom door. I'd seen it once, briefly. It read, obey, respect, endure. She threw it into the fire pit, watched it blacken and curl, then turned to me. Let's write something new. She found a piece of wood, painted it white, and carved 3 words in deep black strokes. Breathe, choose, begin. We nailed it above the new shed's door. That evening, Ruth sat on the porch, shadow curled beside her, and a cup of tea in her hands. She didn't look over her shoulder anymore. She didn't jump at creaks in the floor. She simply existed. And I knew then this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Some houses hold ghosts. Others become sanctuaries, and every now and then, if you're lucky, a house becomes the place where someone finally comes home to themselves. If this story touched something deep in you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a like so it finds someone else who needs it. And if you believe animals aren't just part of nature, but part of us, subscribe. Because every life we save, every bond we honor, makes the world a little kinder.